In the quiet heart of the wildlife reserve, a sudden shout shatters the stillness. Ranger Leo's breath catches. Something urgent, something unexpected. He grabs his radio and sprints toward the noise, every step pounding like a drum in his chest. The dry earth crunches beneath his boots as he races against time. Ahead, the groundskeeper's finger trembles, pointing toward the fence at the reserve's edge. Over there. Hurry. Leo slows, his eyes scanning the tall grass. And then he sees it, a tiny, helpless baby lie on the ground, alone and vulnerable. But standing close by is something no one expected. A female cheetah, silent and watchful, her golden eyes locked on the child. She doesn't growl or attack. She doesn't run. Instead, she stands guard, as if she's the only thing keeping him safe. In that breathtaking moment, instinct gives way to something deeper. Leo stood frozen, every muscle taut, heart pounding in his chest like a drumbeat echoing through the still morning air. Before him was a cheetah, majestic and wild, the embodiment of speed and strength. But something about her stance wasn't what he expected. This was no ordinary predator, ready to strike. Her eyes met his, deep amber pools reflecting a world beyond instinct. A world touched by loss and something softer, more fragile. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped forward, but instead of showing aggression, she moved protectively, placing herself between Leo and the tiny, helpless baby lying on the grass. The baby, barely more than a few days old, whimpered softly, his voice trembling in the vastness of the wild. It was a sound that could break the hardest of hearts, a small cry that held the entire weight of survival. In response, the cheetah emitted a low, mournful sound, unlike the typical growl or hiss of a wild animal. It was almost a whisper, a sorrowful lullaby sung by nature itself. This sound seemed to carry a message, a silent vow to protect this fragile life. Time seemed to stretch and slow. The wild tension in the air shifted. The cheetah's body language softened. Her muscles relaxed just enough to show she wasn't a threat. She began to back away slowly, never take her eyes off the baby, silently signaling that Leo could now approach. Every step Leo took toward the infant felt like walking through a sacred moment, a fragile bridge between two worlds, the wild and the human, fear and trust, instinct and compassion. With trembling hands, Leo wrapped the baby gently in the soft cloth he had on hand, the infant's tiny fingers curling weakly around the fabric as if seeking the warmth he had so desperately missed. The moment was thick with unspoken gratitude, a silent promise shared between the boy and the wild guardian who had stood watch. The rescue team hurried forward, their movements urgent yet careful, understanding that what they had just witnessed was rare, almost miraculous. They carried the child toward the waiting ambulance, the sounds of the wilderness fading behind them, but never forgotten. Behind them, the cheetah remained, a silent sentinel in the morning light, her silhouette framed by the rising sun, guarding a secret no one else could fully understand. For Leo, the memory of that moment would linger forever, not just as a rescue, but as a reminder that sometimes, in the heart of the wild, compassion can bloom in the most unexpected places. As dawn broke over the reserve, the first flickers of sunlight revealed more than just a wild landscape. Hidden in the shadows of night vision footage, a figure appeared, a hooded silhouette moving with purpose and quiet urgency. The person knelt by the boundary fence, carefully placing something fragile on the soft earth before disappearing back into the darkness. The cameras captured every moment, but the identity of the stranger remained a mystery, an unanswered question hanging in the air like the morning mist. There, lying vulnerably on the grass, was the baby, helpless and alone, but not for long. The cheetah arrived shortly after, her sleek form slipping silently through the tall grass. She approached the infant with deliberate caution, her eyes scanning the surroundings for danger. Then, something extraordinary happened. Instead of fleeing or showing aggression, she circled the baby, pacing slowly in a protective rhythm, her body a shield between the child and the wild world beyond. Hours passed as she stayed close, guarding him with an intensity that stunned every observer watching the live feed. Inside the nearby medical tent, staff were already mobilizing. The baby's fragile body was carefully examined and stabilized. The initial diagnosis was grim: exposure, dehydration, and the trauma of abandonment. but hope flickered in their skilled hands. News came through quickly. The infant matched the description of a child missing from a nearby village, a disappearance that had shaken the local community. Relief mingled with disbelief as the team realized the cheetah was not just an animal, but a guardian who had somehow saved a small life. Back at the reserve, rangers and officials gathered, eyes glued to the screen showing the cheetah's watchful presence. Confusion and wonder battled in their minds. How could a wild predator form such a bond with a human child? What did it mean for their understanding of nature's rules? Some saw it as an anomaly, an extraordinary exception to the harsh realities of survival. Others felt a deeper, almost spiritual message, that even in the wildest places, acts of protection and kindness could transcend species and instinct. As the investigation unfolded, questions multiplied. Who had left the baby there? Why? And most haunting of all, how had the cheetah understood what to do when no one else could? The mystery deepened, pulling everyone closer to a truth that was greater than any scientific explanation. As the days passed, a wildlife biologist arrived at the reserve, her mission clear, but her heart heavy. She came to study the strange, protective behavior of the cheetah, hoping to understand what science could explain. Walking quietly near the area where the cheetah stayed, the biologist's trained eyes caught something almost invisible, faint, delicate tracks pressed into the soft earth. They told a silent story. The prints of tiny paws, the footprints of cubs not long gone. Nearby, she found signs of loss, disturbed nests, broken branches, and the scent of sorrow hanging faintly in the air. The cheetah's own cubs, it seemed, had vanished, victims of silent tragedy no one had witnessed. The biologist knelt by the tracks, tracing them with gentle fingers, feeling the weight of grief that lingered in this place. She whispered softly to herself, "This isn't just about instinct, it's about a mother's heart." She shared her thoughts quietly with the rangers and team. The cheetah's fierce guarding of the baby was more than survival. It was a reflection of profound loss. In the shadow of her own grief, the cheetah found a fragile new purpose. The infant wasn't just a stranger to protect. It was the echo of something she had lost, a chance to offer love where hers had been taken. In that moment, the story shifted. It was no longer just about wild instincts or animal behavior. It was about connection, loss, and the quiet, heartbreaking ways grief can transform even the fiercest creatures. The biologist's discovery gave the team new eyes to see the cheetah, not as a wild predator, but as a mother who carried her own broken story, and who, in protecting the baby, was trying to heal a wound that could never fully close. Jonah, the fragile baby once left alone on the wild grasses, began to heal. In the hospital's quiet rooms, his mother stayed close, her hands never leaving his tiny frame, her eyes full of a mix of relief and lingering fear. Slowly, color returned to Jonah's cheeks. His breathing steadied. Each small movement, each blink, each soft coo became a victory. But there was something more than medicine helping him recover. Somewhere deep inside, the memory of the guardian cheetah, the fierce protector who had circled him beneath the sun, had left an imprint that no doctor could explain. Word spread quickly. The reserve where Jonah had been found became a quiet pilgrimage site. Day after day, people came to stand near the boundary fence, hoping for a glimpse of Nyla, the wild cheetah who refused to leave. They brought flowers, letters, and quiet prayers, leaving tokens that told a story of gratitude and awe. Rangers, aware of the growing attention, took turns watching over Nyla. They guarded her carefully, not just from the curious crowds, but from the danger of misunderstanding. Nyla had changed, her pacing slowed, her fierce hunting quieted. She no longer prowled the fields, but returned each morning to the same shaded spot, eyes alert yet distant, as if waiting for something that only she could see. Visitors whispered stories of the silent sentinel, the cheetah who had chosen to protect a human child. Cameras caught fleeting moments, Nyla's stillness, the gentle tilt of her head, the soft brush of her tail on the grass. For many, she became a symbol not just of wild beauty, but a hope, proof that even in the harshest wilderness, compassion could take root. The bond between Nyla and Jonah had grown beyond the wild and the human. It became a shared story, a quiet miracle that invited the world to believe in something larger than instinct. A story about trust, loss, and the unspoken connections that sometimes bridge two very different worlds. As the story of Nyla and Jonah spread beyond the reserve, it captured hearts worldwide, but not everyone saw it as a hopeful miracle. Officials and scientists grew uneasy. To them, Nyla was a wild predator, a symbol of nature's raw and sometimes brutal order. The public's fascination, they feared, risked turning her into something else entirely. A myth, a legend that blurred the clear lines of wildlife behavior. Behind closed doors, the decision was made. Nyla would be captured and relocated, moved far away to a quiet, secure sanctuary where she would live out her days isolated from the crowds and the fence she had come to guard. The authorities believed this was best for her safety and protect the scientific narrative. Leo, who had spent hours observing Nyla's gentle defiance of instinct, felt a heavy weight settle on his chest. He protested quietly but firmly. He had seen something others hadn't. A choice in Nyla's eyes, a depth of feeling that couldn't be erased by rules or fences. But rules rarely bend for moments like these. On a slow, gray morning, the team arrived with a tranquilizer rifle and a specially built transport crate. They approached with care, giving Nyla space and time. She didn't flee. She didn't growl or lash out. Instead, she stood tall and turned her head once, just once, toward the open field where she had once protected a crying baby. Then, with a quiet surrender, Nyla lay down and allowed herself to be taken. As the crate door closed, Ivy, the nurse who had cared for Jonah in his first fragile days, held the baby close. Jonah reached out a small, trembling hand toward the vehicle, carrying away his unlikely guardian. For Nyla, it was a second loss, one that carried the weight of grief without a chance for goodbyes. The sanctuary was quiet, remote, a place designed for safety, not stories. Nyla settled into her new home, an enclosure filled with shade, rocks, and grass that mimicked her wild past. But she didn't roam like the other cheetahs. Instead, she spent hours near the fence, her gaze fixed beyond the barriers, as if waiting for something she knew would never return. Back in the village, Jonah grew stronger with each passing day. The trauma that had once gripped his tiny body slowly loosened its hold. He startled less, smiled more, and began to reach out, touching toys, exploring the world with wide, curious eyes. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a quiet memory lingered, a warmth, a presence that had kept him safe when the world had been cold. One day, a letter arrived at the sanctuary. It wasn't an official message or a scientific report, but something far more personal. It was from Sarah, the nurse who had watched over Jonah in those first fragile days. In her letter, she wrote about the boy's miraculous survival and the strange, silent guardian who had kept watch. Along with the words came a photograph. Jonah, now a year old, smiling softly as he clutched a small toy cheetah, holding the same way a child might hold a blanket or a beloved friend. The photo was taped to Nyla's enclosure fence. At first, Nyla ignored it, but in the days that followed, she approached the image. She sniffed once, then settled down facing the photo, eyes calm yet distant. No words were spoken. No one dared to interpret the quiet recognition that passed between creature and memory. In her own way, Nyla responded. The bond they shared, unseen by most, endured in the silent spaces between heartbeats. News of Nyla's story slowly faded from the headlines, replaced by newer, louder tales. But for those who had been there, seen, or felt the quiet magic of that impossible bond, it remained alive, a story whispered among villagers, told in hushed reverence. In their version, Nyla was more than cheetah. She was an ancestor, a guardian spirit sent to protect what others had forgotten. The baby had survived not by chance, but because something sacred had chosen to stay. Years passed. Jonah grew into a boy full of quiet wonder and gentle questions about the wild. His fascination with animals blossomed into a love that filled every corner of his heart. On his 6th birthday, his mother brought him back to the sanctuary, not for closure, but to show him where his story had begun. Standing at the fence, hand in hand with his mother, Jonah watched Nyla resting in the golden grass. The cheetah, older and slower now, lifted her head and met his gaze. For a moment, time seemed to pause. Jonah stepped forward, releasing his mother's hand, and placed his palm flat against the cold metal fence. Nyla rose silently and moved toward the spot, lowering her head until her nose touched the metal, mirroring his gesture. No words passed between them, only a quiet recognition. A breath-shaped thank you whispered across the divide. Then Nyla turned, laying down in the sun with a calmness she hadn't known before. It was the last time she would see him. In her final days, Nyla rested differently, no longer pacing the edges, no longer waiting. It was as if a thread had been tied, a story finally complete, because what she had lost, she had passed on, and what Jonah had gained, he would carry forever. Some rescues roar with sirens and flashing lights, but some unfold quietly, on a patch of grass, under the watchful eyes of the wild and the grieving. In that stillness, the impossible becomes real, not because it was planned, but because two beings, who had every reason to fear each other, chose instead to trust.